I'm Emma, 26, and my Boston studio apartment isn't much to look at, but it represents everything I've fought for. After years of living under my parents' thumb and cleaning up after my chaos magnet sister Riley, this tiny space became my fortress of independence. Then came that phone call when my mother casually informed me that Riley would be moving in with me. Not asking, telling. They never even considered that I might have other plans. But when they showed up at my door expecting to find me, the shocked expression on their faces when a complete stranger answered instead. Absolutely priceless. If you've ever had family steamroll your boundaries, let me know where you're from in the comments and hit subscribe to follow along on this wild journey. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything changed. I work as a junior architect at Blackstone and Associates, a mid-sized firm in downtown Boston. It took me 4 years to climb from unpaid intern to my current position, surviving on instant noodles and determination. The pay isn't spectacular. Boston's housing market is brutal, but it's enough to afford my 400-square-foot studio in Jamaica Plain. The radiator clanks like a possessed ghost, and the shower has exactly 2 temperatures, Arctic and molten lava, but the exposed brick walls and large windows facing east make it feel like home. This apartment represents more than just shelter. For years, I bounced between dorm rooms, shared apartments with questionable roommates found on sketchy websites, and even spent a summer sleeping on air mattresses in friends' living rooms when a housing deal fell through. Every month I managed to pay rent feels like a victory against everyone who said my artsy career would never support me. I've furnished it slowly but deliberately. A vintage desk from Facebook Marketplace, plants that somehow survive my irregular watering schedule, and walls covered with my own architectural drawings mixed with prints from local artists I admire. My social life is small but meaningful. There's my college roommate Sophia, who's pursuing her master's in social work and has the emotional intelligence of a therapist combined with the humor of a stand-up comedian. We have monthly wine and painting nights where we create terrible art and solve the world's problems. My coworker Marcus often joins us, along with his girlfriend Claire. These people know the real me. They've seen me ugly cry over failed project presentations and celebrate tiny victories like finally affording real groceries instead of ramen. Then there's my family, specifically my sister Riley. Riley is 29 but carries herself like she's still discovering who she wants to be when she grows up. Growing up, she was undeniably the golden child. When I got good grades, it was expected. When Riley scraped by with C's, it was celebrated as improvement. My high school graduation was a casual dinner at Applebee's because it's not like college acceptance was a surprise. Riley's high school graduation, despite her barely qualifying to walk, featured a backyard party with our extended family and a custom cake. This pattern continued into adulthood. Riley has worked at a rotating cast of trendy boutiques, coffee shops, and yoga studios, usually lasting 3 to 6 months before quitting due to toxic management or creative differences. Her Instagram suggests a lifestyle of expensive brunches, designer workout clothes, and frequent weekend trips to places like Martha's Vineyard or the White Mountains. How she affords this on her inconsistent income has always been a family mystery, though I suspect our parents provide more financial support than they admit. Riley's relationship history follows a similar pattern of instability. Her most recent boyfriend, Derek, seemed different. Stable job in finance, owned his own condo, talked about future plans. I met him at last year's family Christmas and was cautiously optimistic that Riley might finally be settling down. According to her tearful phone call 3 weeks ago, he blindsided her by suggesting they take a break because her spending habits were incompatible with his financial goals. Translation: she maxed out her credit cards again, and he got tired of funding her lifestyle. My parents, Patricia and David, raised us in a comfortable colonial in Newton, about 20 minutes outside the city. Dad works as a senior accountant at a large firm and Mom teaches 3rd grade, though she's scaled back to part-time in recent years. They're not wealthy, but they're financially stable through careful planning and conservative spending. Ironically, lessons that seem to skip Riley entirely. Their parenting style could be described as loving but controlling, with a heavy emphasis on family unity and an unfortunate tendency to enable Riley's poor choices in the name of unconditional support. Mom specializes in emotional manipulation disguised as worry. "I just want you girls to be happy" really means do what I think is best for you. Dad prefers the authoritarian approach. His decisions are presented as logical conclusions that any reasonable person would reach, and questioning them is seen as either immature or disrespectful. Neither of them handles conflict well, preferring to smooth over problems rather than address root causes. This brings me to the phone call that started everything exactly 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday evening. I was working late on a residential project, sketching elevation options at my kitchen table when my phone rang. Seeing Mom on the caller ID, I almost let it go to voicemail. Late-night calls from my mother rarely brought good news. "Hi, Mom," I answered, pencil still in hand. "What's up?" "Oh, good, you're home," she said, her voice carrying that artificially bright tone that usually preceded bad news. "Your father and I wanted to talk to you about something important." I set down my pencil, already feeling anxious. "Okay, what's going on?" "Well, as you know, Riley's been having a difficult time since the breakup with Derek," she began, speaking slowly as if delivering a prepared speech. "She's been staying with us temporarily, but it's not working out long-term." "Why not?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. My parents' house had rules: dinner at 6, no overnight guests without permission, contribution to household expenses. Riley had never been good with rules. "You know your sister," Mom said with a sigh. "She needs her independence. She's an adult woman, not a teenager." The situation is becoming tense. Translation: Riley was driving them crazy and they wanted her to be someone else's problem. "So we've decided," Mom continued, "that she should move in with you temporarily. Just until she gets back on her feet." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "We think it would be good for both of you," she said, her tone becoming more animated as if she were selling me on an exciting opportunity. "Sisters supporting each other, and Riley can help with your rent." "It's perfect." "Mom, my apartment is 400 square feet, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It's a studio. There's literally no separate bedroom." "Riley doesn't need much space," she dismissed. "She can sleep on the couch temporarily. You have that nice sectional." I did have a sectional, a small one I'd saved for months to buy, which also served as my only seating area and where I often worked on projects when my desk felt too cramped. "How temporarily are we talking?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Well, we can't put a timeline on healing," Mom said, and I could practically hear her rehearsing this conversation in her head. "Riley needs time to process the breakup and figure out her next steps career-wise. Could be a few months, could be longer. The important thing is family supporting family." "Did you ask Riley if she wants to live with me?" I pressed. "Did anyone think to ask me?" "Of course Riley wants to live with you," Mom said, as if this were obvious. "You're her sister. And we know you'll do the right thing, Emma. You always do." The phrase hit me like a slap. "You always do the right thing." Their code for "you always do what we want without complaining." "I need to think about this," I said. "There's nothing to think about." Dad's voice joined the conversation, indicating he'd been listening on speakerphone. "Riley needs help and you're in a position to provide it. We've already told her she can stay with you starting this weekend." My stomach dropped. "This weekend?" "As in 4 days from now." "The sooner the better," Dad continued. "She's been sleeping in her old room, but this situation can't continue indefinitely. We'll help her move on Saturday morning." I didn't agree to this, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Emma Jane," Mom said, using my full name like I was 12 years old. "Family comes first. I would think you'd want to help your sister during a difficult time." And there it was, the guilt trip. The implication that refusing made me selfish, uncaring, a bad sister. It was a tactic that had worked my entire life, and they knew it. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "I have work to finish." "We'll talk more this weekend when we bring Riley's things," Dad said. "This is happening, Emma. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be." They hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. In the span of a 10-minute conversation, my life had been rearranged without my consent. My sanctuary was about to be invaded by someone whose idea of organization was leaving empty coffee cups on every available surface and whose emotional processing involved dramatic phone calls at 2 a.m. I tried returning to my work, but concentration was impossible. Instead, I found myself pacing my small apartment, seeing it through new eyes. Where would Riley sleep? Where would she keep her clothes? How would I work from home with her constant presence? Riley wasn't quiet on her best days, and she was rarely having her best days lately. The next morning, I called in sick to work and met Sophia for emergency coffee at our usual spot in Harvard Square. The cafe was busy with a morning rush, providing enough background noise for me to vent without being overheard. "They can't just decide this for you," Sophia said after I'd explained the situation. She was stirring her latte with more force than necessary, a sure sign she was angry on my behalf. "It's your apartment, your lease, your life. Try telling them that," I said miserably. According to my parents, saying no makes me a selfish monster who doesn't care about family. "Have you talked to Riley directly?" Sophia asked. "Maybe she doesn't want this arrangement either." I shook my head. She texted me yesterday saying how excited she is to have sister time and asking if I have a good hair dryer. Sophia rolled her eyes. Of course she did. We sat in silence for a moment while I contemplated my options. I could stand firm and refuse, but that would lead to weeks of guilt trips, disappointed sighs, and family gatherings where I'd be treated like the villain. I could accept the arrangement and hope Riley would be a considerate roommate, but past experience suggested this was unlikely. Or, what if, Sophia said slowly, her eyes taking on that mischievous glint I'd learned to both love and fear, Riley couldn't move in because someone else was already living there? What do you mean? My brother Jake just moved to Boston for his residency at Mass General, she explained. He's staying in a crappy extended stay hotel while looking for an apartment. The housing market is insane right now. Everything decent gets snatched up immediately. I stared at her. You want me to get a roommate to prevent my sister from becoming my roommate? Think about it, she said, leaning forward. Jake is clean, quiet, works insane hours so he's barely home, and desperately needs affordable housing. You need someone to help with rent and to occupy your apartment so Riley can't move in. It's perfect. It was crazy. Completely inappropriate. Potentially disastrous. Tell me more about Jake, I said. By that evening, I was sitting across from Jake Morrison in a small Italian restaurant near the hospital where he was doing his residency. At first glance, he looked exactly like what central casting would order for young doctor. Tall, lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, which he probably had given the stress of residency. But his demeanor was more tired graduate student than TV heartthrob. I really appreciate you considering this, Jake said, glancing at his watch. I have to be back at the hospital in an hour, but Sophia insisted I meet you as soon as possible. She mentioned you're having trouble finding housing, I said, still not quite believing I was having this conversation. Jake laughed, but it wasn't entirely humor. Trouble is an understatement. I've been outbid on 3 apartments in the past 2 weeks. Apparently, having 4 roommates and offering 6 months rent up front is the new normal in Boston. We discussed practical matters, rent, utilities, bathroom schedules, kitchen privileges. Jake's offer was more than I'd expected and would significantly ease my financial stress. He explained that his schedule was brutal, often at the hospital for 30-hour shifts followed by brief periods of sleep and study. I should be honest, I said, lowering my voice despite the restaurant's noise. There's another reason I need a roommate quickly. My family is pressuring me to let my sister move in this weekend, and I'm trying to avoid that situation. Instead of judgment, Jake nodded understandingly. Family pressure about living situations? I get it. My parents still ask when I'm going to get a real job instead of prolonging my education. You don't think it's terrible of me to block my sister this way? He considered the question carefully. I think it's your apartment and your decision. Sometimes we have to make choices that other people don't understand. By the end of dinner, I had a new roommate. Jake moved in the following evening, bringing minimal belongings, clothes, medical textbooks, a laptop, and not much else. We quickly transformed my small apartment to accommodate 2 people. I consolidated my work area to one corner of the main room, and Jake set up a small sleeping area behind a folding screen we bought at IKEA. It was cramped but functional. More importantly, when Saturday morning arrived and my parents showed up with a rental truck full of Riley's belongings, it was Jake who answered the door. I'll never forget the expressions on their faces. My father's confusion, my mother's shock, Riley's hurt bewilderment as she stood behind them in the hallway. It was like watching their perfectly constructed plan crumble in real time. "Can I help you?" Jake asked politely, clearly confused by the group of strangers at his door. "We're looking for Emma Morrison," my father said, his voice uncertain. "Emma Wilson," I corrected from behind Jake, stepping into view. "Mom, that, really?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my neighbor's doors cracking open, drawn by the commotion in the hallway. "Emma," my mother finally managed. "What is this?" "This is Jake," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My roommate." Roommate. Riley's voice was small and hurt, but I thought I was supposed to. "Can we please take this inside?" I asked, mortified by the growing audience of curious neighbors. Reluctantly, my family filed into my small apartment, which suddenly felt even smaller with 5 people inside. Jake moved to the kitchen area, giving us space while remaining present, exactly as we discussed. The confrontation that followed was everything I'd expected and worse. My parents' shock turned to anger, Riley's hurt morphed into dramatic accusations of betrayal, and I found myself defending a decision I'd made in desperation. "You deliberately got a roommate to keep me out," Riley said, tears streaming down her face. "Your own sister." "Yes," I admitted, refusing to lie or minimize my choice. "I did." The word hung in the air like a confession of murder. "How could you be so selfish?" my mother demanded. "Riley needs help, and you choose a stranger over family." "Because family shouldn't make decisions for me without asking," I replied, surprised by my own firmness. "My apartment, my choice." What followed was an hour of heated discussion, hurt feelings, and uncomfortable truths. But something unexpected happened during that confrontation. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't back down. I didn't apologize for setting a boundary. I didn't agree to the guilt and manipulation. Jake's quiet presence helped. When my father demanded to know his credentials and whether he could be trusted, Jake calmly provided references and answered questions without becoming defensive. When my mother suggested he leave so we could discuss this as a family, he politely but firmly stated that he lived there now and wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, my family left, angry and disappointed, but forced to accept the new reality. Riley would have to find another solution, and for once, it wouldn't be my problem to solve. The days that followed weren't easy. My parents maintained radio silence, clearly hoping I'd come crawling back with apologies. Riley sent a series of increasingly dramatic text messages about being abandoned and betrayed by the one person who should understand her. But something had shifted in me. For the first time, I'd chosen my own needs over family expectations, and the world hadn't ended. My apartment remained my sanctuary, now shared with someone who respected boundaries and contributed to household expenses. Jake turned out to be an ideal roommate. His schedule was so demanding that we often went days seeing each other only in passing. He was clean, quiet, and grateful for the affordable housing. More importantly, he provided a buffer against family pressure simply by existing in my space. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Riley texted that she'd found a room in a shared house in Somerville with 2 other girls our age. She'd also started a new job at a high-end boutique and was seeing a therapist to work through family trauma, a not-so-subtle dig at me that I chose to ignore. My parents eventually resumed contact, though our relationship felt different. The automatic assumption that I would comply with their decisions had been broken. They still disagreed with my choice, but they could no longer simply override my decisions. 3 months later, Jake and I have settled into a comfortable routine. He's found his own apartment and will be moving out next month, but our friendship has become one of the unexpected gifts of this whole experience. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most chaotic circumstances. The autumn light streaming through my east-facing windows has a different quality now, warmer somehow, though I know that's probably just my imagination. It's been exactly 1 year since that pivotal Saturday morning when my family showed up expecting to find me compliant and available, only to discover I'd finally learned to choose myself first. As I sit at my vintage desk, now positioned more prominently in the center of my apartment since Jake moved out, I'm putting the finishing touches on what might be the most important project of my career so far. The drawing spread before me represents 6 months of work on a community housing development in Roxbury, affordable units designed with the kind of thoughtful details that make small spaces feel like home. It's ironic, really, how my own housing crisis led me to this specialization in efficient, dignified living spaces for people who need them most. The project came to me through Marcus, who'd heard about the development through his girlfriend Claire's work in urban planning. When I presented my initial concepts to the nonprofit developer, emphasizing natural light, storage solutions, and spaces that could adapt to different needs, they didn't just approve the design, they asked me to lead the entire project. At 27, I'm the youngest lead architect Blackstone and Associates has ever had on a development this size. The promotion came with a salary increase that finally makes my Boston rent feel manageable rather than panic-inducing. More importantly, it came with recognition that my artsy career, as my family once dismissed it, was actually building something meaningful. Every time I visit the construction site and see families walking through their future homes, testing the flow between rooms and imagining their lives in these spaces, I remember why I fell in love with architecture in the first place. My apartment has evolved too. Jake's departure last spring left me with a decision: find another roommate to help with expenses, or learn to live comfortably alone again. I chose solitude, and for the first time in my adult life, I can afford it without anxiety. The folding screen that once divided our shared space now serves as a backdrop for my drafting area. I've added more plants, ones that require actual care rather than just surviving neglect, and my walls now feature a mix of my own architectural sketches and pieces from local artists whose work I can finally afford to buy rather than just admire. The most significant change isn't visible, though. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing I can trust my own judgment, especially when it conflicts with other people's expectations. My relationship with my family has found a new equilibrium, though it took months of uncomfortable conversations and careful boundary maintenance. The first few interactions after Jake moved out were tense. Mom kept asking pointed questions about my living situation and whether I was lonely now that my roommate arrangement had ended. Dad made several comments about how inefficient it was for me to pay full rent on my own when Riley was still looking for affordable housing. But I held firm. Every suggestion that I should reconsider helping Riley, every guilt trip about family obligations, every attempt to make me feel selfish for choosing independence, I weathered them all with a simple phrase I'd learned from my therapist: "I understand you're concerned, but I'm comfortable with my decision." Yes, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Sarachan specializes in family dynamics and boundary setting, and our sessions have been more valuable than any architectural theory class I ever took. She helped me understand that my parents' controlling behavior wasn't malicious. It came from their own anxiety about letting their children make mistakes. But understanding the source didn't mean I had to accept the behavior. The breakthrough came last Christmas. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't automatically say yes when Mom started planning our holiday schedule. Instead, I calmly explained that I'd be joining them for Christmas Eve dinner, but would be spending Christmas Day with Sophia's family, as I'd done for the past 3 years when they hadn't bothered to ask about my plans. The initial reaction was predictable: hurt feelings, accusations of choosing strangers over family, the usual manipulation tactics. But I didn't argue or justify. I simply repeated my decision and changed the subject. By Christmas Eve, the tension had settled into an uncomfortable but manageable new normal. Riley's journey has been more complicated and, ultimately, more encouraging than I expected. The shared house in Somerville didn't work out. Personality conflicts with her roommates led to drama that culminated in her moving out after just 2 months. But instead of running back to our parents or guilting me into helping, she surprised everyone by finding a studio apartment in Medford that she could barely afford and making it work through sheer determination. The job at the high-end boutique lasted longer than her usual employment stints, nearly 8 months. When she was eventually let go due to restructuring, which, reading between the lines of her carefully worded texts, probably meant the owner discovered her habit of borrowing inventory for Instagram photos, she didn't spiral into her usual pattern of dramatic phone calls and financial panic. Instead, she did something unprecedented. She asked for advice rather than demanding rescue. The conversation happened 6 months ago over coffee in Davis Square, halfway between our apartments. Riley looked different, more grounded somehow, less like she was performing the role of her own life and more like she was actually living it. "I need to figure out what I actually want to do," she said, stirring her oat milk latte with the same nervous energy she'd had since childhood. "Not what looks good on Instagram or what mom thinks sounds impressive. What I actually want." It was the first time I'd heard her talk about her own desires without framing them in terms of how they would appear to others or what they would get her. The therapy she'd started, initially as a dramatic gesture to process our family trauma, had apparently begun to do some real work. "What are you thinking?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I've been volunteering at the animal shelter in Cambridge," she said, and I tried to hide my surprise. Riley had never been particularly interested in animals, and volunteer work wasn't usually her style. "I started because I was lonely and needed something to do, but I actually love it. The dogs don't care if my outfit is perfect, or if I'm having a bad hair day. They just need consistency and care." She'd been working toward becoming a certified veterinary technician, attending evening classes while working part-time at a pet supply store. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly wasn't Instagram-worthy, but for the first time in her adult life, Riley seemed to be building something sustainable rather than just maintaining an image. Our relationship has slowly rebuilt on more honest ground. We text regularly now, sharing small updates about work and life, without the undercurrent of drama that used to characterize our interactions. She asks for advice sometimes, and I offer it without feeling responsible for whether she takes it. When she tells me about challenges or setbacks, I listen with sympathy, without rushing to solve her problems. Last month, she surprised me by asking if I wanted to get dinner to celebrate her acceptance into a veterinary technician program that starts in January. Over pad thai and spring rolls at our old childhood favorite restaurant, she brought up that Saturday morning a year ago. "I was so angry at you," she said, twirling noodles around her fork. "I felt like you'd betrayed me when I needed you most." "I know," I replied, because I had known, and it had been hard to live with. "But you were right," she continued. "I needed to figure out my own shit instead of expecting you to save me from the consequences of my choices. Moving in with you would have just delayed the inevitable." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and that felt like enough. My parents' evolution has been slower, but equally significant. They still struggle with not being the primary decision-makers in their adult children's lives, but they've begun to adapt. Dad has stopped presenting his opinions as objective facts that any reasonable person would accept. Mom has mostly stopped using emotional manipulation to get her way, though she occasionally slips back into old patterns during times of stress. The real test came 3 months ago when they actually asked, rather than announced, if I'd be interested in joining them for a family vacation to Cape Cod. When I explained that my work schedule wouldn't allow it, Mom's initial response was to suggest I ask my employer for special consideration because family should come first. But before I could even respond, Dad intervened. "Emma knows her own schedule," he said. "We'll miss you, but we understand." It was a small moment, but it represented a seismic shift in family dynamics. They were learning to respect my autonomy, even when it disappointed them. My social life has expanded beyond the small but meaningful circle I'd maintained for years. The confidence that came from successfully setting boundaries with my family has translated into other relationships. I'm more willing to speak up when plans don't work for me, more honest about my needs and preferences, more comfortable taking up space in conversations and decisions. Marcus and Claire have become closer friends, not just colleagues who occasionally joined wine nights. We've started a monthly dinner club, rotating hosting duties and cooking meals that are actually planned rather than thrown together from whatever's in our fridges. Last summer, We took a long weekend trip to Portland, Maine, staying in a rental house and spending 3 days eating lobster rolls and exploring used bookstores. I've also started dating, something that had always felt impossible when my living situation was unstable and my family dynamics were chaotic. There's been nothing serious yet, a few second dates, one brief relationship that ended amicably when we realized we wanted different things, but the possibility feels real now in a way it never did before. Sophia, who remains my closest friend and occasional partner in crime, has graduated from her master's program and started working as a family therapist. She jokes that our friendship prepared her well for her career, given how much practice she's had talking me through family drama. Jake, my former roommate and unexpected ally, finished his residency and is now working as an emergency medicine physician at Boston Medical Center. We still meet for coffee occasionally, and he's become part of our extended friend group. The apartment itself has become more than just a symbol of independence. It's become a home in the truest sense. I know the exact angle of morning light that hits my desk, which floorboards creak, how to jiggle the bathroom door handle to make it close properly. I've hosted dinner parties here, celebrated promotions, provided a safe space for friends going through breakups or family drama of their own. Most importantly, it remains a space where I make the decisions. When the lease comes up for renewal each year, I sign it without anxiety about whether I can afford it or guilt about who I should be sharing it with. When I rearrange furniture or hang new artwork, I do it because it pleases me, not because it meets someone else's expectations. The radiator still clinks, though I've learned its rhythms well enough that the sound has become comforting rather than annoying. The shower temperature remains unpredictable, but I've mastered the precise adjustment needed to avoid scalding or freezing. These quirks, which once frustrated me, now feel like personality traits of a space that has truly become mine. Looking back on that frantic week a year ago when I conspired with Sophia to find Jake and prevent Riley's invasion, I'm struck by how a decision made in desperation became the foundation for everything that followed. Standing up to my family about my living situation wasn't really about the apartment. It was about claiming the right to make my own choices, even when those choices disappointed people I loved. The ripple effects have been profound. My career has flourished because I've learned to advocate for my ideas and push back against suggestions that don't serve my goals. My friendships have deepened because I'm more honest about what I need and want. My family relationships, while different than they were, are ultimately healthier because they're based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. But perhaps the most significant change is internal. I no longer wake up with the low-level anxiety that used to be my constant companion, the fear that someone would make a decision for me, that I'd be expected to sacrifice my needs for someone else's convenience, that my carefully constructed independence could be dismantled by a single phone call. I've learned that love doesn't require self-erasure. Family doesn't mean accepting whatever treatment is offered in the name of unity. Kindness doesn't mean saying yes to every request for help, especially when that help enables rather than empowers. The story I started telling a year ago about a young woman whose family tried to steamroll her boundaries has become something larger. It's become a story about discovering that you can love people deeply while still protecting your own well-being, that you can maintain family relationships while refusing to accept family dysfunction, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. As I prepare to submit the final drawings for the Roxbury housing project, I think about all the conversations I've had with prospective residents about what makes a space feel like home. It's not just about square footage or amenities. It's about having control over your environment, about feeling safe and secure, about being able to close the door and know that what's inside is yours. That's what I fought for in my 400-square-foot studio apartment in Jamaica Plain. Not just the right to live alone, but the right to make decisions about my own life. The right to set boundaries without being labeled selfish. The right to define family love as support rather than obligation. A year later, as autumn settles over Boston and I prepare for another holiday season of navigating family dynamics, this time from a position of strength rather than defensiveness, I know that the fight was worth it. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The apartment remains small, imperfect, expensive by any reasonable standard. But it's mine, chosen by me, shared on my terms. And in a city where housing is scarce and family pressure is constant, that's not just comfortable, it's revolutionary. For anyone still struggling with family boundaries, still trying to figure out how to love people without losing yourself in the process, remember this. Your space is sacred. Your choices are valid. Your needs matter. And sometimes the most uncomfortable conversations really do lead to the healthiest relationships. The people who love you will learn to respect your boundaries. The ones who don't were never really supporting you anyway, they were just comfortable with your compliance. Choose yourself. Choose your space. Choose your life. The world will adjust. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own boundary-setting experiences in the comments. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for building authentic, healthy relationships with the people who matter most.